Hello 8th graders, this video is to show you how to complete the next step of the science fair. This step is the results section. In this section there are a couple of things that need to get completed. There are really three parts to this assignment and I want to outline each one of them for you. The way that you're going to find this assignment is from Google Classroom. This is what you'll find when you pull up in Google Classroom. And the very first thing it says under directions is to watch this video, and since you are watching this video, you are well on your way. Good job. So I'm going to go back to the document that I handed out to you in class to walk through all of the parts and pieces that need to be in this assignment. The very first part of the assignment is a couple of paragraphs. Depending on your project, you might have 2 paragraphs or you might have 3. Everybody is going to have 1 paragraph that summarizes your overall results. This is just a way to tell the reader basically what happened with your data. You're not going to go into every single bit of data, you're just going to summarize it. Some things that I typically see that you should not do is phrasing that looks like this. If you were going to do an experiment on how does rubbing alcohol affect seeds, some people write the rubbing alcohols group had an average of 2 seeds sprout. Rubbing alcohol doesn't have a group. It doesn't own a group. What you would say is something like this. You might have to go a little bit, just check your grammar. In the experimental group where the seeds were soaked in rubbing alcohol, then you can say what happened. After you get done talking about what actually happened as far as some averages, the next paragraph is to talk about any qualitative observations. So remember back when we did this, qualitative is all the stuff that did not include numbers. So you're going to be talking about what color did it look like? Did it make a smell? Was there smoke? Did it leave marks on the test tube? Anything that you think that might be relevant but isn't actually one of your dependent variables. And there's really nothing off limits here except for things that are totally obscure, like my sister was being hilarious while I did this experiment. That has nothing to do with the experiment, even though it's qualitative. That should not be part of this. Only things that you think might explain some data down the road. Finally, the third paragraph is one that not everybody is going to do. It's not optional. It's just something that is going to be included if you had to do any calculations. So for example, if your dependent variable was the density of the bread, in order to do the density, you would have to do mass divided by volume. And so this is going to be a really short paragraph that just explains what calculations you did. And it's just going to be a few sentences with a couple of examples of your calculations. I know a few of you out there are calculating a few different things like density, refractive index, anything where you had to do any calculations whatsoever. This is the spot where you need to explain what you did. After you get done with your paragraphs, Part 2 is the tables. This is identical to what we did earlier in the year when we made tables in Google Sheets, like back in September. So the first thing that I want to tell you is if you are struggling, I'm going back now to the Google Classroom assignment, if you're struggling with these next 2 sections, please go back to those assignments within Google Classroom and take a look at the work that we did there from a while back. You will probably need to brush up. Don't think that you can go into this cold and just knock it out of the park. You will need to go back and review how to do these sections. But within the tables, you're going to have one table that shows all of your trials and another table that's going to show your statistics, which I'll talk about next. Make sure when you're doing your tables that you have everything labeled and has a title. A lot of people tend to forget the title. And underneath the table, make sure that you write all measurements in and then whatever you measured in. If you remember back, the computer can't calculate boxes that have letters in them. So if you're putting your units in every single box, it's going to make your life harder down the road when we make the graphs. The second table that you're going to have is statistical analysis. That's the one that's going to have your mean, median, and range. And you should have the computer calculate these for you. Again, go back and review what we did back in September to figure out how do we get the computer to calculate these 3 things. And of course, if you need help, please come and see me at office hours. The last part of this assignment is the part that's going to have the graphs. There should be at minimum 2 different graphs, but you can have more. So if you've done an experiment where you've collected a lot of data that you think could be shown in a couple of different ways that would help your judges to understand what you did, by all means make more, but you have to have at least 2. So one graph is going to be showing all of your trials, and another graph is going to be showing your averages for each group. So let's look at some examples. So the results paragraph that I have in my exemplar, this is the paragraph that talks about the summary of my data. Please notice that it does not go into every single little bit and piece of data that I collected, and it's relatively short. This paragraph is going to be kind of dry, but it's necessary to outline your averages. The next paragraph is talking about some different things that I saw when I did my experiment. I saw some white crystals along the edges, but because that has nothing to do with my dependent variable, it's in a separate paragraph. But I thought when I was collecting my data that these things might be useful to think about later on when I do my conclusion, so I included them. But please also notice it's not super long either. After the paragraphs, remember that we had to do data tables. So in your data table, please notice it has a title, and I've got all my groups across the top. So in this experiment, I tested 3 different types of salt, and my control group was pure water. And I've got all my trials going down the side. And then all of my data is filled in without units. At the very bottom, I have my units right here. All measurements were in Celsius. After that table, I've got my statistical analysis table right here, and I've got my mean, median, range, and I've included mode. You don't have to do that. It's just something that I got into the habit of doing, but that's not a requirement. And again, all my groups across the top with my units on the bottom. Now I've organized this so that my graphs are kind of in between each of these things, because to me as a reader that just makes more sense, but you can organize these however you want. There's no requirement for where the graphs go. But I've got my trials data table right here. I've got everything labeled. I've got both axes, both my y-axis and my x-axis are labeled, and I've got a title on the top. And then my second graph is for all of my statistics. My averages. I've got all my groups and the labels. Everything's good to go in this graph as well. So I wanted to take just 1 second to talk about how to get graphs into these documents, because sometimes that is a problem for some folks. So I went back to the document within Google Classroom where we made graphs and tables, and I made myself a little graph here. I made sure I've got my title. Everything's good to go. Everything needs to be done on this before you copy it over. And you're going to have to make all of your data tables and graphs in a separate Excel sheet. Please don't attach it to the assignment. This is just a place where you're going to do your work and then copy it over. So a lot of times people have a hard time because they right click and they're like, hey, there's no copy, and if I do Control C, it's not going to copy over either. In Google, you have to go to this drop down arrow on the top right, and you have to go copy chart. Once you've done that, then you can paste it over into the assignment in Google Classroom, and you're going to put all your work into the boxes here on this assignment before you click turn in. Please come and see me in office hours if you need any help with any of these parts. But be sure that you go to the Google Classroom assignments first to review how to do these things before you come to see me with any problems that you might be having. Good luck.